and disturbed, everybody. This is Daryn Carp on the hot mic with John Thrasher, giving a little dance party to our sussy radishes and those who are able to see our video feed right now. We always do something with our hands, like we have to Vogue.
I know. But, I don't know why I do that.
For those who don't listen to NMR, well, we are back, and we had to take a quick break last week because I was at BravoCon and some iconic stuff happened, but listen to NMR for all the recap there. But I literally lost my voice for about 4 days, so I couldn't record. But we're back in the saddle, and I'm glad to see you, Johnny boy.
I am too. You know, we recorded the NMR before we're recording this episode, but I want to say it here again. I was just saying on NMR, you know, it's always nice to take a little bit of a break, especially when we're both super busy with other work. But you know, getting back in the saddle with you, it always is just exciting. It's a great way to stay in touch as friends. And, you know, I do miss you. Like when we don't record, I'm like, what's missing in my life? It's Daryn.
We're actual friends.
Yeah, we are good friends. Well, I don't know if I'd say we're friends, but you know.
As we teased on NMR, today we have an old friend of a case.
That's right. We have actually done this episode, the case, we should say, on Martinis and Murder way back in the day. But
yes,
we've done a couple episodes that we've done before because maybe there's some new information. I think, you know, even us as
just
podcasters,
old case. Yeah, it feels good.
And I think, you know, we've obviously advanced in our careers as true crime producers and podcasters as well. And maybe we have a different perspective that we didn't have back in the day, you know. So I think it's a good way to refresh and share some new information, if you will. So Daryn, it's nice to have you back. Hello to all the sussy radishes that are watching on Patreon.
Hello to sussies, and thank you for your patience as my voice recovers.
Yeah, and by the way, I started to get a little something over the weekend, and I was like, if my voice goes next, we're gonna be in big trouble. But
Bravo's at fault.
Bravo's at fault, and I think I'm good, so I can get through the very beginning of this episode. You ready to go, Daryn? I think
I'm ready, baby.
All right, between December 1989 and September 1990, okay. The state of Florida would be sent into a panic as men began going missing, later being found dead on the side of the highway. Now, in each of these cases, a wealthy middle-aged man would seemingly disappear out of thin air while driving on the Florida highway. In total, 7 men would be killed at the hands of a vicious new serial killer stalking the Florida highways. While the state has seen its fair share of serial killers in the past, this one would prove to be unlike any that had ever come before that. I mean, we've heard of the Florida Man, you know, which I think was happening even before the 1990s. You know,
Florida Man has been a thing since Florida's existed.
Since Florida became a state, that's right. Throughout history, killers have preyed on the vulnerable, most commonly being sex workers, especially in Florida. But what happens when that narrative gets flipped? What happens when the prey becomes the predator, actually?
Mm-hmm.
And this was the case of America's most infamous female serial killer, Aileen Wuornos. Eileen Carol Pittman was born on February 29th, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan. Eileen's mother, Diane, had been married to her father, Leo Pittman, when she was only 14 years old.
Wow.
Now, yeah, and almost 9 months exactly from their wedding, Diane gave birth to her first son, Keith, with the arrival of her daughter Eileen following 11 months later. And I do think, you know, that young age to be going through so much of this stuff, I think it really is a factor throughout the rest of this case, you know, like young parents at that age. I mean, obviously 14, I mean, you have to wonder what kind of, you know, sexual misconduct was happening between these two people. You know, it's horrific to say the least.
And not to jump ahead, I just wanted to make sure I was right about this, hence me researching. But when Charlize Theron plays Aileen Wuornos in Monster, and you watch at how, like, her transformation, if you've ever seen that movie, I mean, it's dark, a lot of sexual abuse, just has one of the hardest scenes to watch in all of cinematic history, in my personal opinion. And she plays it so well, and this kind of gives you that, just how dark her life was kind of from start to finish.
Yeah, that's a good point. She won the Oscar, I believe, for that role.
She did.
Didn't she?
I believe she did.
Did I ever tell you about the time we were at, just a quick side tangent, we were at South by Southwest. Yeah, you were with me. Do you remember we walked by Charlize Theron? Like, she was just like walking in the crowd. And she was 10 feet tall.
And we were just like,
we're like, oh,
yeah.
She just left like a barbecue joint. We're like,
I did that.
Charlize?
I did that one. I did that one time with Uma Thurman on the street. And I was just like, oh, there she is.
Oh, there she is. There goes Uma Thurman.
Yeah.
By the way, I love Uma Thurman. She's amazing.
I mean, obviously
amazing, and Charlize for that matter. But by the way, Charlize was very like you could tell people were noticing her, and she was just like kind and smiling and kind of waving to people. Just such a gem,
gorgeous person in the world.
That's just fine. Other than that, nothing else to worry about. Anyway, so as I said, almost 9 months exactly from their wedding, Diane had given birth to her first son, Keith, with the arrival of her daughter, Aileen, about 11 months later. So, however, by the time Aileen was born, her mother had already filed from divorce from her husband. Okay. And remember,
and her mother's at like 16 at this point.
Yeah, at this point, she's super young. Exactly. Yeah. And Leo had suffered tremendously with his mental health and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So this is kind of the background leading up to some
mental unwellness, probably maybe lack of access to fixing that, divorce, right. Having children kind of early in life. All of these things are kind of calculated to it being just hard and tough. After his divorce, he would separate entirely from the family, Leo, that is, finding himself in and out of both mental facilities and jail. So just tough. Ultimately, his life came to an end when he committed suicide while serving a sentence in jail for kidnapping and raping a 7-year-old.
See what I mean? Just so tragic.
Yeah, Diane was still essentially a child herself when she found herself divorced and attempting to raise 2 babies on her own. Again, she's in her teens still. Yeah. After a few years of trying her best to be a mother, Diane realized she was unable to do it and asked her parents, Lori and Britta Wuornos, to adopt her 2 small children. And let me just say, don't care of the background, don't need to know much. That has to be, and I don't have children, the hardest decision a parent can possibly make, and usually the smartest, because maybe she cares so much about her kids. I hope she cares so much about her kids that she recognizes that she's not capable.
Yeah.
And asking for help. I feel like that's so hard to do. And, like, give it up to her for being able to do that.
Yeah. You have to have so much self-awareness and a lot of.
At that age?
Yeah, at that age. And to know that maybe, you're not going to be able to provide for the child. Like that's very selfless in that regard. At least we hope that's what her intentions were, of course.
Well, Lori and Britta,
sorry to interrupt. Lori and Britta, are those 2 women? Do we know this? Lori and Britta?
No, like Lori is a man's name usually, even in Little Women, Lori, but I don't know.
All right. Why don't you look I want to look it up. But I was like, does she have lesbian parents? And we never.
But Britta, maybe? I don't know. Well, Lori and Britta,
I knew Britta
that would
when
be
I was
cool.
Young. I'll look it up.
Cool. Okay. Lori and Britta, while they agreed, this proved to be an incredibly unsafe environment. By the accounts of both Aileen and Keith, the children were both brutally beaten. Their grandfather, Laurie, was especially cruel towards Aileen. According to Aileen, when her grandfather wanted to punish her, he would lock her in his homemade sauna room for hours with the heat blasting as high as it would go. What the fuck?
That sounds horrible. And by the way, I did look it up. Laurie is in fact a man.
Yeah, the
Laurie
grandfather.
Jacob Wuornos. Yep, exactly.
I always thought, it's like Lindsay is like kind of both.
Yeah,
I
there's
sure
some.
If Laurie was like strictly men. Anyway.
Yeah.
He would repeatedly tell her she was worthless and a mistake and allegedly would sexually assault her. I mean, how could this person not grow up like this? Right. In the face of this abuse, Eileen's only comfort came in the presence of her older brother. The two had always been exceptionally close. However, around this time, their relationship began to taking a disturbing turn. Allegedly, Aileen and Keith shared an incestuous relationship. Several classmates of theirs had reported them to teachers for touching each other in inappropriate ways, accusations which were quickly swept under the rug and ignored by their family. And
which
at the age
happens
of just
all the time, sadly.
Yeah, they're ignoring them or whatever.
Yeah.
And at the age of 11, Aileen began trading sexual favors with older men in exchange for cigarettes, food, and drugs. She obviously had no other choice. In her teen years, she'd been assaulted by her grandfather's friend, resulting in her becoming pregnant. And she carries the baby to term. She gave birth in a woman's shelter, and the baby was placed up for adoption. Generational trauma, you can just see it kind of unfold here. Yeah. Shortly after the loss of her child, she'd be faced with another major loss when her grandmother would die of liver failure. The death of his wife only fueled her grandfather's rage and even said that he blamed Aileen for her death. This dispute would result in him kicking Aileen out at the mere age of 15 years old.
Yeah, I mean, imagine going through all of this before you're even 16 years old. I mean, that's just so tragic in so many ways. But without anywhere else to turn to, Aileen began living in the woods. She slept in an she slept in an abandoned car and turned to sex work in order to make enough money to feed herself. Without any parental figures to guide and support her, Aileen was was soon drawn into a life of crime and uncertainty. She was desperate not only to get away from her troubled past, but also to get out of the treacherous Michigan cold, which you don't have to go through a lot to want to get out of Michigan. Let me just tell you that. Our friend Ian lives in Michigan, Daryn, who is a big fan of the show and listens and, and everything. And, we talk from time to time, like, I would never do this. I could never live in Michigan. I don't know how people do it.
It is beautiful on the lakes, though. I mean, it's like Chicago, and people are like, I can't live in the winter.
Oh,
I'm
it's
like, yeah,
gorgeous.
but during the summer, it's gorgeous. But yeah, I mean, you need a snowbird in LA, I guess.
That's my, and I will be doing that, by the way, now that you live there. So make room for me.
Yay.
Yep. Yay. Wonderful. Sounds great. Can't wait to see you. Anyway, living outside had been tremendously difficult, of course, especially when the bitter winter weather began to roll in. She decided to start over somewhere new and hitchhike over 1,000 miles west to Colorado, where she would live for approximately 2 years. And during her time there, Aileen would have her first run-in with the law when she was arrested for driving under the influence and recklessly firing a .22 caliber gun. In 1976, 20-year-old Aileen would be on the road yet again as she hitchhiked all the way to Florida. She's like, I'm snowbirding, and it's going to take me years and thousands of miles, but I'm going to do it. Yeah. And that's where she met 69-year-old Louis Gatz. Now, Louis was extremely wealthy, and he was flattered by receiving attention from a young woman like Aileen.
Men.
Yeah, right. And Aileen was very, traditionally attractive, I would say, in her early 20s. There's photos of her. You can go and Google them. She was kind of that stereotypical blonde, really attractive woman. At least the pictures I've seen. I hope I'm accurate on that. Anyway, the two began dating and soon after were actually married. And their marriage was short-lived, however, because Aileen soon began showing a much, much more violent side of herself. Louis was constantly needing to pick up his wife from the local bar where she would find herself scrapping and fighting with the other patrons, kind of one of those people that, my guess is she's probably taking a lot of her childhood and life story out on other people, which tends to happen when people drink. One of these bar fights even resulted in Aileen spending a short stint in jail. Louis, however, was pushed to his limit only 9 weeks into their marriage, when during an argument, Aileen began beating him with his own walking cane. That's an interesting weapon of choice of all things. Louis filed, of course, a restraining order against his wife, and their marriage was annulled in July of 1976. Their annulment came only days after Aileen had received the worst news of her life. Her beloved brother Keith had passed away from throat cancer. So Eileen's life, if you haven't picked up on it yet, is not going
shitty. It's
shitty. It's not going. This is no storybook situation here. Well, his life insurance policy was awarded to her with $10,000, which, of course, in her situation, as you might expect, she blew through in a matter of just a few weeks. So really tragic.
Horrible. The one person she loved in her life,
or could rely on was a support system.
Like John said, I mean, she blew through $10,000 in just a matter of weeks. The money was spent frivolously on guns, drugs, cars. Someone who doesn't have an idea of how to have a stable life, obviously. Right. Aileen had experienced severe poverty for the majority of her life, and for the first time, she had a considerable amount of cash. She began thinking of ways to maintain this new lifestyle after the money was gone. Sex work had been enough for her to survive, but she began striving for much more. And in order to make more money, Aileen realized she had to up the stakes of her crimes. Her solution was armed robbery.
Okay, not the solution I think we should all look for, but as someone who's been through the ringer.
Yeah, maybe, kind of a no choice. She didn't even know there would be other options.
Right. And by the way, I want to say we're not by any means saying, excusing this kind of behavior or these kind of crimes. I'm just simply speaking for both of us here, I think, trying to justify the understanding of why somebody would do something like this. And when you've gone through the types of things she's gone through, it's sort of par for the course. That's really my
point. Exactly. Like she kind of never had a shot to start. Using a gun she had purchased using the insurance money from her brother, Aileen began mugging people and soon upgraded to robbing convenience stores. Unfortunately for her, she was not very good at it. And in 1981, she was arrested for robbing a shop of $35 and 2 packs of cigarettes. She spent a little over a year in jail for that and then was released. She'd have several other meetings with the law over the next decade, including charges for grand theft auto, robbery, forging checks, attempted assault. And in 1986, Aileen would meet whom she described as her soulmate, Tyria Moore. And Tyria was a hotel maid who Aileen had met at a lesbian bar in Daytona Beach. The two became inseparable.
You've been there.
And I invented it.
Yeah.
And soon moved in together. Aileen was completely infatuated with her and wanted to spoil her as much as she could. Oh, this is like her first chance at happiness.
I know.
And like, I know how it ends, and it's just like so sad.
I know. And something else we should maybe mention here too, as gay people, what I've known or experienced, not personally, but I've seen it happen is, maybe Aileen was gay, obviously she was gay to some degree her whole life, but you wonder how much of that she was suppressing.
Sure.
How that manifests itself into,
or sexual assault, how that could have warped something in her mind too. Like, you just don't know. I mean, there's so many different factors. You don't know what she was suppressing. She couldn't be herself.
Yeah. And, I've seen it manifest itself personally, and you hear of stories about the way it manifests itself in other people. And sometimes it manifests itself into the negative, aggressive energy of crime. So let's think about that too as we talk more.
Well, their main source of income came from Aileen's sex work, although Tyria was always eager to help Aileen in her other money-making schemes. Aileen had a whole orchestration of petty crimes she needed to maintain their lifestyle, but these crimes would soon become deadly. On November
like some people do DoorDash, she had other things going on. Okay.
She had other things, yeah.
Yeah.
On November 30th, 1989, I was only 1.5. Aileen was doing sex work in Daytona Beach when she was picked up by 51-year-old Richard Mallory. Richard was single, he was wealthy, and the owner of a successful electronics store. After picking her up, he drove her to a secluded area where they began drinking, hanging out. Now, somewhere during the interaction, Aileen pulled out her gun and fired 4 shots into Richard's head and torso.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe he had something that she was looking for and didn't want to really deal with it. So
sounds something fishy.
Yeah. 2 bullets were found lodged in his lungs, which are credited as the cause of his death. She then took the cash in his wallet, as well as a few electronics that she found in the car, which she later pawned. Richard's car was discovered first, only a couple days after the incident, but his body would remain hidden for nearly 2 full weeks.
Wow.
His body was found several miles from the vehicle, hidden in a wooded area. Now, it's actually unknown what exactly made Aileen decide to kill Richard, but his death was only the beginning, as most of you may know about this story. Several months later, in May of 1990, she would strike again. And on May 19th, she was picked up by a man named David Spears. David was 43 years old and a machine operator by trade, and he had been traveling up the I-75 when he saw Aileen walking on the side of the road. David pulled over to let her in, and soon she was offering him sexual favors. He agreed.
This is something I would never do. I would never see someone. I might ask, do you need help? You need me to call someone? But I'm not sure I would ever pick someone up. That seems a little
I know. We've talked about like this type of stuff on the show before, where I feel like us sitting here in our mid-30s, some of us a little later than others.
Some of us only in our mid.
Some of us only in our mid. But, in 2023, we know not to do that. But it might be because at this time we were learning about people hitchhiking and doing things that, I think in the 70s, were maybe a little more common and less dangerous
they
at
definitely
the time,
Definitely.
So that is something to think about. But he agreed to her price, by the way. So he drove to a secluded area where he then began to undress. And while he was busy undressing, Aileen snuck out of the car, walked over to the driver's side window, and opened fire. And just like her first victim, Aileen dumped the vehicle several miles away where she left his body. And at this point, don't you start to wonder, like, she clearly is not feeling any kind of emotion towards this. Like, she is.
It's a way of survival, I think,
yes,
for
that's
her.
my
This
point.
is a way to keep her lifestyle with her and her partner.
Yeah.
That's what she's thinking about. And while she is held responsible for her actions, there is certainly there's no excuse for it, but there is an explanation of why she's doing this.
Precisely. I mean, that's what I mean. Like, it's almost like methodical. It's like, oh, here's another guy. He has money. Got to get rid of him. Like,
it's
she's
just a way to maintain that fix of something. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, by the time David's vehicle was discovered with a flat tire on the side of the highway, he had already been declared a missing person. Along the side of the road, they found the license plate as well as several of David's belongings. Interesting that Aileen seemed to have taken the license plate as well.
Yeah, I wonder if she couldn't be tracked or it'd be harder to register the car.
Something like that. David was shot a total of 6 times, and his nude body was left in the woods to be discovered over 2 weeks later on June 1st. This time, Aileen wasted no time in between her attacks, and by the time David's body was discovered, Aileen had already claimed another victim.
So she's going quick, and I think the benefit here is that she's a woman, so I don't think people are really looking out for
probably
women.
looking at her, yeah.
You know, she can kind of hide in plain sight, and I think it's probably easy to have victims because usually the woman tends to be the victim and tend to be less strong. So I think people are underestimating her, and that she's using to her advantage.
And I'm wondering if investigators are noticing. I mean, we know that David's body was nude. I don't know about the exact other details so far, but there seems to be at least some capacity of sexual connections here with these violent crimes. So I'm just wondering, like, okay, maybe they're not looking at women, but at what point do they start thinking, okay, these men can't all be the result of stereotypical hetero men getting naked, frankly.
Right. Well, on May 31st, 40-year-old Charles Cascadin was driving home from a trip to St. Louis to visit his elderly mother. On his way back, he spotted Aileen hitchhiking and decided to stop and let her in. By now, Aileen was developing a ritualistic pattern to her killings, which is what we're saying. Like others before him, Charles was seduced by Aileen, who convinced him to drive somewhere private. She then shot him 9 times before removing his body from the vehicle and driving off. Aileen was gaining an alarming amount of momentum with her killings, averaging a murder every 2 weeks. I mean, this is like a machine.
That's what I mean. Yeah, the pattern is wild. Another thing that's interesting is how many times she's shooting each of these guys. It's not a one and done situation.
It's not self-defense.
Definitely not self-defense. She's making sure they are dead, 6 times, 9 times with this. I just find that interesting.
Her violent cravings would only become more insatiable from here on out as she had finally perfected her method, or at least she thought. Perhaps her 3 previous killings had lured her into a mistaken sense of competence, maybe even confidence, because on her next hunt, she'd leave behind some crucial evidence. In June of 1990, Peter Symes left his house in Jupiter, Florida. Peter was a 65-year-old Christian missionary who had set out to drive up to New Jersey. So that's about a day's drive.
Yeah, that's
in his back seat was a stack of over 50 Bibles, which he planned on passing out to people he met along his travels. That fateful day, his Bible would be of little use to him when he came in contact with Aileen. She had set up her usual trap as she was hitchhiking on I-75, waiting for her next victim to pick her up. When Peter picked her up, it is unknown whether it was to seek her sexual services or if he saw it as an opportunity of outreach to spread his religion. But either way, what is known for certain is that Peter was never seen again and his body never was uncovered. After killing him, Aileen drove off in his vehicle, where she then went to pick up her girlfriend, and the two pawned any valuables they found in the car and then used that money to buy drugs and alcohol. So just keeping up the fix.
Yep.
To celebrate, they decided they want to drive to Daytona Beach to see a firework display. And while they were driving, Taria was speeding and lost control of the vehicle, which resulted in it flipping.
Yeah. So even more chaos, coming into this. Well, the 2 women fled the scene unharmed. However, a passerby witnessed them walking away from the crash site. Inside the vehicle, police also found a number of pawn shop receipts for various items. Each ticket contained an item which had been stolen from one of the previous murder victims.
Oh, man.
So now, she's really getting kind of sloppy here. Upon further forensic analysis, a handprint was found on one of the door handles, which would later be identified as Aileen. Now, while investigators were finally able to catch a break and get some helpful evidence, Aileen was far from finished. On July 31st, a salesman from Ocala named Troy Burris that just threw me for a minute because I was thinking of Troy from Real Housewives of Atlanta and Candy Burris.
Okay.
I was like, Troy Burris. What a weird connection. Yeah. Check out our BravoCon recap, by the way, on NMR. So a man named Troy Burris would make the deadly mistake of picking up Aileen while he was out on a delivery run. She seduced him, made him drive to a secluded area, and then, as you can expect, shot him twice at point blank range. Now, Troy's body was discovered in the woods 5 days later. And during the month of August, Aileen decided to lay low, but in early September, she'd resurfaced to claim yet another victim.
Wow.
On September 11th of that year, Aileen was picked up off of the I-75 highway by Charles Dick Humphreys. Dick was a retired Air Force major as well as chief of police. Okay.
Damn.
Yeah. During his career, he specialized in investigating child abuse cases. After Aileen was picked up,
I wonder why he picked her up, though.
Yeah, you do wonder that, right? Like maybe
it's Good Samaritan.
Maybe. Yeah, I guess we could never really know for sure. Well, we know that, after Aileen was picked up, she soon fell into her familiar routine. And after driving off into a secluded area under the guise of sex, it sounds like Aileen became violent. At some point, Dick got out of the car and apparently attempted to flee. He was shot several times. And it also makes you wonder, if he's chief of police, he's probably armed, right? Like you would think he'd be armed.
Unless he's off duty. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. Well, he was shot several times and he staggered a few feet away from the car before collapsing and receiving one final shot to the chest. Really tragic and horrible way to go. By the end of 1990, several counties from all over Florida had begun putting the pieces together and realizing that there were striking similarities in these cases.
Task forces, baby.
Yeah, a dedicated task force was assembled to begin investigating the idea of a serial killer rather than treating each murder as an isolated incident, which they had been doing so far. And I mean, maybe because we're podcasters and we've told 1,000 stories, but it's like, guys, these are all very similar situations here.
Yeah, and I don't know how many it takes to kind of realize that pattern, but yeah.
Yeah, especially in the the 90s at this point. Well, it was only a matter of time before their search would bring them directly to Aileen, but not before she could claim one final victim.
In November of 1990, a 62-year-old police reservationist named Walter Gino Antonio was found partially nude and shot several times. His car was discovered several days later abandoned south of Daytona Beach, and the MO fit perfectly with the other killings, and the special task force assigned to the case had never been more confident that they were dealing with an actual serial killer here. With little to go off besides the similarities in the killings, police turned to the only case where nobody was ever uncovered, Peter Symes. Police got back in touch with the witness who had claimed to see two women leaving the scene where Peter's car had crashed. Based on this description they gave, police were able to compile a composite sketch, which was then spread throughout the media, and every news station in Florida showed the sketch of these two women. Only hours after the sketch was released, police received their first tip naming Aileen and Taria as the two women in the sketch. Wow. Several tips would come in giving their names specifically. Upon running the handprint found in Peter's car, it came back as positive identification for Aileen. This just goes to show how tech is really starting to pick up here. And by January, investigators were confident that they had their killer, but did not have enough physical evidence to bring Aileen in, as the only scene where her DNA was found was the only case where no body was found either. And instead, they began concocting a plan to get Aileen to confess by enlisting the help of her girlfriend.
That's right. That's a great way to, get the information you might want from somebody.
Yeah, pit them against each other, I guess.
That's right. Well, on January 9th, 1991, Aileen was arrested under a previous warrant while she was at a bar in Daytona. Taria was found while Aileen was in custody, and investigators proposed their barter. They offered her immunity to help elicit a confession out of Aileen, which she agreed to.
Damn, no one's got Eileen's back here. No one. Shit.
Yeah, Taria worked closely with the police over the next week, and she was given a motel room where police would carefully monitor her calls. I feel like I do remember the scene from Monster a little bit.
Yeah.
Like that movie is so old now, but I kind of do remember this. Taria made several phone calls to Aileen begging for her to come clean with authorities. And I'm wondering at this point if Aileen has any idea that, she's probably going to get set up, right? Like, isn't that what we expect?
I don't know, because this is the one person she trusts.
Yeah, that's true.
And she's implicated with it too. So she might not have thought she flipped,
That's true. That's true. Well, finally, on January 16th, while on the phone, Aileen confessed to murdering and robbing the men. She pleaded that she had only killed them because they attempted to rape her.
And Aileen was arrested the same day for the string of murders while she was willingly confessed. Well, she willingly confessed to her crimes and remained adamant that the men each had either raped her or attempted to rape her. And in court, this argument was not received well, and she was awarded a total of 6 death sentences for the murders of Richard Mallory, David Spears, Charles Cascadin, Troy Burris, Charles Humphreys, and Walter Antonio. And you know what? I'm sure if she had shot them once and then fled, taking their car, shooting them multiple times,
there's certainly,
it just doesn't probably hold up in court.
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
No formal charges were ever placed for the murder of Peter Symes, as the whereabouts of his body still remain a mystery today. And her legacy of being one of America's most prolific serial killers has been immortalized in the form of film and TV. Obviously, most famous is Monster, starring Charlize Theron as Aileen and Christina Ricci as the character based on her girlfriend.
Oh, yeah. I forgot Christina Ricci was Tyria. Yeah.
And Aileen herself did numerous on-camera interviews from her jail cell as well. She was executed on October 9th, 2002 by lethal injection. She refused to have a final meal and instead chose a hot cup of coffee, not decaf coffee though, John. Just
that's what I'm drinking, everybody.
That's all she wanted. So just a terrible story, I think, from start to finish.
Yeah, and
terrible life.
I think over the years, as true crime podcasters and folks that work around true crime, the understanding is that not that you ever sympathize with anyone who's killed this many people, but you do understand based on her background and her upbringing, like
she had no choice.
Yeah, and the lifestyle that she was forced to live and what happens in that scenario. And, it's really tragic. And I think it's an injustice of the bigger system, of the American culture and what was happening at that point, especially when it comes to mental health. So hopefully we're all advancing in those ways. Daryn, where should people talk to us?
Yeah, shout us out at Carp Daryn, at J Thrasher, of course, Shaken and Disturbed podcast fans on Facebook, and of course our Patreon page where we are in the discourse, my friends. Let's end on some. Go ahead, John.
Oh no, I was just going to say all of these links are in our show notes if you're looking to click right away. You know what I mean?
That is true.
There you go.
We need a quick click. Let's end on some listener shout outs though, John.
That's right. I have to give a shout out to one of my favorite people in the world, my little cousin, Aurora.
Aurora, what a good name.
It's not a great name. And her coworker, Allison, who's a big fan of the show, Daryn, and apparently met Aurora after she had been listening to her show. And her friend Allison is like, are you related to John? Like, and was like fangirling out. So I thought that was so funny. So shout out to Aurora and shout out to you, Allison. Thank you for listening. And thanks for you guys being such big fans.
Yeah. Thank you to both of you.
Yeah. And by the way, Aurora, hope I see you over the holidays. Love you. Just Aurora, a little shout out.
Come to my holiday. Come to mine. Come with the Carps.
No, come to mine. Come to mine.
Yep. Well, Brittany showed her favorite Beanie Baby, which is, of course, Claude the Crab, in our Facebook group. And we love that you guys connected with our beanie stories. I mean, it is truly the thread that threads the needle here. It brings us all together. And John, my mom did not give them away on Halloween.
Well, you said she was going to be giving them away.
I think because you had convinced her maybe there was money in there. And so
she put over Thanksgiving. Yeah.
I'm going through it all, and I'm just going to try and list things on eBay. Look out for that.
Please do. Make a small fortune and give me 20%. That's all I'm asking.
Absolutely.
And by the way, you guys, if you have a moment and the resources, please do consider joining us on Patreon. We've put a lot of content up over the last couple of months. And if you join our top tier as a Sussy Radish, you get this podcast episode ad-free and in video form. And let's give another wave to our Sussy Radishes as we end this episode.
Hi,
that's right. So you can see our shining faces, and it's a really great way, if you are a big fan of the show, to help us keep it going. That is patreon.com/shaken and disturbed, or you can check it out in our show notes. Daryn, what a great show. It's good to revisit an old classic, if you will. And
yes, it is. And we wish everyone a happy and safe Thanksgiving this year. We'll be back on Sunday with a new episode, but have a very delicious and very safe travel Thanksgiving.
It just hit me that this week is Thanksgiving week when this episode drops. How is that happening? Oh my goodness.
I know. It's insane.
All right.
It's insane.
Check your freshies, everybody.
And guys, check your brake pads on Thanksgiving. You don't need pants and you don't need
There you go.
There you go.
See you next time.
Bye.